Well, it's good to know that my reviews are always more logical and consistent as far as ratings, and are reflected as such, than big sites like Diaper Review. So they came out with the review for the Nikon D850. I have that camera, by the way. I've made countless videos about it. So they gave it a score of 89. They scored it below the Nikon D500. Okay. They scored that one below the Nikon. Okay, there's a mistake. Okay, there's a mistake. Let's talk about the other cameras that are exact same score as the Nikon D850. The Sony A9, which I tested extensively, I made several videos on it. The Nikon D5, a horrible camera. And the ever defective, countless recall defective, Nikon D750. Now the Nikon D750 has really awesome dynamic range and it has wonderful output, but it's slow autofocus. It's a cheap polycarbonate body made in Thailand. It's not that expensive of a camera, but no, it doesn't even come close to a Nikon D850. Now, you actually have to presume the fact that these cameras, these earlier cameras like the D750 and D5, were reviewed at the time. So some people will try to make the correction that you cannot compare a score on an older camera that was introduced years ago with a modern camera which has been improved upon. And that's actually not true. It doesn't actually follow logically. That score obtained at the time means it was fixed in time at that point. So out of the totality of what like the Nikon D750 or the Sony A9 or the Nikon D5 is still comparable to the freeze frame of the Nikon D850 in what it is. This is ridiculous. Like the Sony A9, for example, is 24 megapixels. The ergos on it are actually the most horrible, and this is where I actually agree with Froboy up in New York. The ergonomics are the most horrible ergonomics of any camera I've ever had in my hands. It only has 5 frames per second mechanical shutter. Now, the electronic shutter and the zone autofocus tracking are absolutely brilliant. For moving subjects in outdoor sunlight, you could rip off a lot of shots really fast, incredible buffer. But the camera is a one-trick pony. The camera is literally, and of course all the videos of people having an overheating in video. Now, we'll all admit that Nikon video has never been as good as the Sony video, but Nikon also doesn't overheat. Not only that, that camera, which was not introduced that long ago, is $4,500. $1,200 more than the Nikon D850. I fairly rated that camera. Everybody praised me endlessly for fairly evaluating the Sony A9. That camera is a horrible value, the Sony A9. The D850, slow. I had one of those cameras, slow autofocus, defective as hell. Mine was defective. Like everybody's was defective. The shutter mech failed, lock up the camera. Countless recalls, issues, oh damn. Not made anywhere near as good as the D850. Turns out the D850 has a true all-magnesium chassis with an all-magnesium bracket assembly for the holding the shutter mech, magnesium front plate, top plate, bottom plate, which doesn't exist on Nikon D800, D800E, D750. D850 is a far better value. Now, the only difference really, if we actually ignore the fact of one being a crop sensor, one being a full-frame sensor camera between the D500 and the Nikon D850, which you can't ignore that, but if we do ignore it, the Nikon D500 has an incredibly deep buffer and incredibly high frames per second relative to the Nikon D850. But the Nikon D850, and you may not remember this, as I reported since I own both cameras, has the exact same RAW and JPEG size as the 51 megapixel medium format Fujifilm GFX. The Nikon D850 is writing an enormous amount of information comparatively to the Nikon D500 and also the Nikon D5, which is also a 20 megapixel sensor camera. D5 is insanely overpriced. It has an AA filter. It's a horrible value at $6,500. Horrific video. Of course, nobody would buy a D5 for video use, but I mean, for video, it's totally useless. That camera got the exact same rating as the Nikon D850. People say, well, the Nikon D5 is a flagship level camera. The Nikon D850 is also a flagship level built camera. It doesn't have an integrated vertical grip, but you're talking about another $400 for that, another $150 for the battery, $3,800 plus like an off-brand charger. You're looking at $4,000. That's everything. That's still $2,500 cheaper than the Nikon D5. The image output on the Nikon D850 is absolutely mind-blowing. The camera is incorrectly scored by Diaper Review. At 89%, that is an incorrect score. The comparators in the 89 percentile score, like the Sony A9, the Nikon D5, and the Nikon D750, make scoring the Nikon D850 absolutely ludicrous and insane. They explicitly state in their conclusion that the D850 is the best DSLR on the market today, and that is undeniably true. That statement is accurate. They're dead wrong on the value. Yeah, adjusted for inflation, not only is the Nikon D850 cheaper than the Nikon D810, it's explicitly superior in countless ways. Now, SnapBridge is useless. SnapBridge is useless on everything, so we have to ignore SnapBridge. You might not want to ignore it, but we have to. We have focus peaking on the Nikon D850, far superior output on the Nikon D850 than the Nikon D5, Nikon D750, Nikon D810, Nikon D800. Superior build quality. We have focus peaking. We have much faster lens calibration on the Nikon D850. For $3,300 of what it's actually priced at, it's actually a deal and a half. So anyway, their evaluation on the Nikon D850 is incorrect. I'd actually rate the Nikon D810 at 85%, the Nikon D5 at 78%, Sony A9 at 75%, and I've tested all of these cameras, of course. The Nikon D850, which I own, at 92%, which is 2% above the Nikon D500. The only deficiencies relative to the Nikon D500 are frame per second and incredibly deep buffer, but you have to consider that the Nikon D850 is writing well over twice as much data per shot than the Nikon D500, for crying out loud, for Pete's sake. Pull your head out of your fanny and make that realization. The Nikon D850 was scored incorrectly by them. To even dream that the most recent camera release relative to the Nikon D850 being the Sony A9. Now, that particular website is owned by Amazon, by the way, a company for which I have the least amount of respect on this earth. Sony A9 is a horrible camera. It is really, really, really good at one thing, and impressively so. Electronic shutter, ambient to outdoor illumination, and if there's any other type other than ambient. Outdoor illumination and electronic shutter, and zone autofocus tracking, continuous zone autofocus tracking. On that, it is really good. Everything else, that camera sucks. That camera is literally a one-trick pony, and yet they score it exactly the same as the Nikon D850. The Nikon D850 is a jack of all trades. The Nikon D850, even without the vertical grip, has 7 frames per second flash photography. Paparazzi, photojournalists, newsies, event photographers, they need as many frames per second with flash photography as possible. You can't do flash photography with electronic shutter. The Nikon D850 is the absolute best camera I can imagine for sports, action, wildlife, portraiture, photojournalism, architecture, landscape, portrait, everything. It's best at everything. The only thing that's slightly better than it would be an incredibly deep buffer and an enormous amount of frames per second like the Nikon D500, and edging it out would be a medium format camera for portraiture and landscape. But not by an enormous amount at all, not even by that much. So you have a one-trick pony camera like the Sony A9, which it exactly damn well is, and I tested it extensively, compared to a jack of all trades and a master of all trades, which the Nikon D850 is. A jack of all trades and a master of all trades camera. For $1,200 less than the Sony A9, and it doesn't overheat, and it's built better, and yet you're going to rate both of those at a score of 89? You, sir, meaning these people that graded the D850 at 89 percentile, equal to the Sony A9, you, sir, are messed in the head. That is stupid. It's ignorant, it's unintelligent, and it's illogical. These people have no idea what they're talking. All reviews are subjective, you know? They shouldn't be. But they are. Well, that's a huge website, you know, everybody goes, well, so what? You know, so what? You gotta have X religion with 1 billion followers. What the hell does that mean? It doesn't mean a damn thing. It's a bandwagon fallacy. That review is defunct and defective. It's a pile of horse poo and the most, horrible. Nope. The Nikon D850 does not score an 89%. It absolutely does not. Not on the spectrum of what it is, its value, and what it does, and what it's capable of doing. There's never been a camera that absolutely is perfect for doing it all. The Nikon D850 comes closer than any other camera out there. They say, well, about the GFX. You said the GFX is your... excuse me. You said the Fujifilm X-T2 is your favorite camera. It is. It is my favorite camera of all time. This is my favorite camera of all time. This camera doesn't have a super deep buffer. Its low light, high ISO performance is... it leaves a lot to be desired. But the Nikon D850 comes closer than any other DSLR or mirrorless camera to being a master of all possible shooting styles and for paparazzi, photojournalism, portraiture, sports, action, wildlife, architecture. I mean, you name it. The D850, it's like, you know, you got one camera. It's like you only have one camera that'll be the best at everything. Well, the X-T2 is my favorite camera of all time, the camera that will do the most in every one of those categories. Because the X-T2 is far from ideal from landscape and portraiture, for obvious reasons. But the Nikon D850 comes closest, so to rate it alongside a poor ergo, overpriced, overheating junk box like the Sony A9 is flat out retarded. It's just epically stupid. And Nikon is certainly, you know, I'm not cozy with, well, I'm not cozy with Nikon at all. They do a lot of stupid stuff, but they didn't do anything stupid with the Nikon D850. However, SnapBridge is still an issue. SnapBridge is still a problem. But who gives a damn? I don't care about SnapBridge. Most people just say, it's there, it's useless. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you like these reviews, you could always click the link below. Tell me to jump off a cliff. But, man, that review is horrible. Thanks for watching. Catch you later, girlfriend.